Howdy y'all, welcome back to Sara Dishcloth Knit Along. Have you already watched my overview video? And you have your yarn and knitting needles in hand? Good. If not, you can go back and watch the overview and make sure you have what you need to start swatching. So we're going to knit this swatch. It is 11 stitches wide and 18 stitches high, and it has a motif in the middle. With this swatch, you can check your tension and gauge, as well as practice some of the new techniques in this pattern, such as two-color double knitting and how to treat the edges. It is also a good idea to familiarize yourself with the yarn and knitting needles you picked, and make sure the yarn does not give you any unpleasant experience like joint pain or skin irritation. Age is not too critical for this project. After all, it's a dish rag, right? But still, if it's too loose, you want to adjust your gauge with smaller needles, and if it's tight, you might consider using bigger needles. Tension might also affect your cast on and bind off too, so pay extra attention. Okay, are you ready? Let's get started. Cast on. There are many fancy ways to cast on for double knitting, like Italian cast on, invisible cast on using double strands, and so on. If you want, you can do a little research on YouTube and learn those cast on methods, but for our knit along, we're just going to use simple long tail cast on, using one color instead of two colors. We're just doubling the number of cast on. As you can see on the screen, the swatch will be 11 stitches wide. To make an 11 stitch wide fabric in double knitting, we will double the number and cast on 22 stitches. If you are not familiar with long tail cast on, you can use your own cast on method. Just make sure there are 22 stitches on the needle and they are not too tight. After casting on, we'll start working on the pattern. Depending on how you hold and carry your yarn, there are a few different methods to double knit. I'm a continental knitter, or a picker, meaning I hold my working yarn in my left hand. If you are like me, you should try the continental method first. If you are an English knitter, or a thrower, meaning you hold your yarn in your right hand, then you can try the English method. But in my experience, it is significantly slower and more awkward than the continental method. If you can do both continental and English style knitting, you may want to try carrying each color in both hands. I'll call it combination method. And lastly, if handling two colors of yarn at the same time is too much for you, you can try one color at a time method. This method may be comfortable for those who are used to doing brioche or mosaic knitting, but to me this method is very confusing, as I often lose track of which stitch I need to slip and which stitch I need to knit or purl. But everyone's brain works differently, so this method may be the easiest method for you. A tricky part of double knitting in flat is edging. In double knitting, you often end up with a hole on the edge. Like for example, this sample I knit, I can insert my finger here. Or you end up with some speckle of different colors on the edge. If you're not obsessive compulsive knitter like me, this might be okay, but I prefer my edging to be nice and clean. There are many ways to treat your edges. Again, you can do some research on YouTube, but my favorite is what I learned in Craftsy online course by Alasdair Post-Quinn. You'll need to do two things. At the beginning of each row, you'll twist yarns, meaning you rotate the two strands of colors 360 degrees. I don't think it matters whether you twist it clockwise or counterclockwise. This twisting locks the edge and kind of seals the hole. And at the end of each row, for the last two stitches on the needle, you need to do something called selvage pair. You first slip one, as if to purl, and then you slip the next stitch through the back loop, as if to purl through the back loop. This sounds too complicated, but you'll get used to it quickly. With those two things, twisting at the beginning and selvage pair at the end, you'll achieve this flawless clean edging. One last word on this. I mentioned before that this edge solution method was taught by Alasdair Post-Quinn in his Craftsy class. Now, I think the class was made several years ago, and since then he slightly changed his method. So if you see his YouTube tutorial videos, he may show you something a little bit different. I asked him why he changed it, and he said many knitters had issues with this slipping through the back loop, so he modified his method slightly. But he assured me that his old method, which I adapted, and his current method basically achieve the same effects. So for now, I'm sticking with his old method, which is how I learned it. Okay, so with those edge solution in mind, you'll start knitting. As I mentioned in my overview video, double knitting is basically a 1x1 ribbing using two different colors. So if you knit one with color A, then you purl one with color B. And you knit one color A, purl one color B. And that creates a double-faced fabric like this one. And you continue doing that, knit, purl, knit, purl. And if you knit with color B, you purl with color A on the next stitch. What you need to keep in mind is when you knit, both strands of yarn will be in the back of your work. And when you purl, both strands will come to the front of the work. Otherwise, you'll see a purl bump on the other side. And you basically follow the chart or written instructions for which colors to use for each stitch. Just remember that knitting in one color is always followed by purling in the other color. I recorded demonstration videos showing myself knitting the swatch using different methods, so you can watch them when you're not sure how to do certain stitches. Next is a bind off. Like cast on, I prefer simple bind off method using one color. But remember, you cast it on double the number of stitches, so when you bind off, they need to be condensed. In this knit along, we'll do something called condensed bind off. This was introduced to me by Lucy Neatby in her Craftsy class. You basically pass the stitch over 2 worked stitches instead of 1. That makes the bind off surface very condensed and nice and tight. One caveat is that it tends to make the bind off very tight. So you should watch your tension and bind off very loosely. After you bind off and weave in the ends, then it's time to block it. Your work may look loose or warped, but wait till you block it. If your yarn is machine washable, go ahead and run it through the washing machine. If it's machine dryable, put it in a dryer. And make sure the fabric can withstand the agitation. So the yarn that I'm using is cotton and linen blend. The yarn label said hand wash only and lie flat to dry, but I machine washed it and dried anyway because, come on, it's a dish rag. And this is the result after. You see, it looks nice and tidy. Everyone makes mistakes. If you watch my demonstration videos, you'll see that I often notice my mistakes on the very row or on the following row and correct it on the spot. The motif is very simple and easy to see visually. So hopefully you'll be able to notice your mistake sooner rather than later. The way to correct mistake is nothing special. You either think or unknit, or if you're on a different row, you drop the wrong color stitch and knit with a correct color. But what if a mistake is too far down? Theoretically, you can drop the stitch as far down as you like. If you have a crochet hook, it may be a little easier to do so. But this may end up in a disaster. When all fail, you can frog or rip your work and do over. You may want to use a lifeline every so often, so it's like an insurance to make it easier to rip it back to a certain point. Any other questions? Please post them on my Ravelry Group thread or email me, and I'll try my best to answer your questions. You can also join me on the YouTube Live, so you can ask me questions on the spot or watch me demonstrate the answers to your questions. The date and time is to be announced on the Ravelry Group thread and Instagram. Okay, thanks for watching. I hope this has been helpful and you'll be able to complete the swatch successfully. See you soon and good luck.